Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And we're on a chapter. This is the last chapter, last section of Lech Lecha, and it is really a beautiful and profound chapter and deals with the Brit Milah, with the covenant um, between God and the Jewish people and the males, and it's the covenant of circumcision. And we'll see in this chapter the degree to which this covenant is significant. And there are elements to this as to why it's specifically the covenant of circumcision, as to its implications, which are not explicitly stated in the Torah, but we'll take a look and see what is explicitly stated and what Rashi from the tradition shares with us. We'll see, and hopefully I will add a little bit more from what I understand is actually at stake going on here. So we're on to verse 2. Va'etna vriti, this is God speaking to Abraham. Va'etna vriti beini uveinecha. I shall place my covenant between myself and between you. Va'arbe otchem b'ma'od ma'od, and I will multiply you very, very greatly. So, va'etna vriti, I will place my covenant. Brit shel ahava, this is a covenant of love, meaning that God promises and commits to loving Abram and his descendants forever. It's covenantal. It's a commitment. Uvrit haaretz, and also a covenant of the land, right? The land of Israel. Lahorisha lecha, to give it as an inheritance to you, al yedei mitzvazo, by means of this commandment, because this covenant includes a commandment, the commandment, of course, of circumcision. And so what we're saying here is this commitment to circumcise his males, all the males, is something on which the land of Israel depends. That is, the possession of the land of Israel by the Jewish people depends. Again, going back to our understanding that in any final sense we own nothing except perhaps our reputations, which would be, I think, is somewhat equivalent to our souls or an element of who we are, the reputation we create. But at any rate, we don't own anything, and everything that we have, including our bodies, is there temporarily. And likewise, the land belongs to God, but God has a right to, as it were, rent that land to whomever he wants, and also to make whatever he feels, whatever demands God feels are appropriate in terms of rental payment. And one of the, you might say that a deposit on the land, a rental deposit, is this circumcision going on. Vayipol Avram al panav, and Abram fell on his face. Vaydaber ito Elohim lemor, and God continued to speak to him with the following words. So, Vayipol Avram al panav, right? He's still called Avram here. He fell upon his face, mimora hashchina, from the fear of the divine presence. In other words, he was so alarmed by being in the presence of the divine that he fell onto the ground on his face. She'ad shelo mal, because up until he was circumcised, lo hayabo koach la'amod, he did not have the strength, whether physically or spiritually, to stand before God. He did not have it. So that's telling us something again about the significance of circumcision. The Ruach HaKodesh, and the Holy Spirit, nitzvah alav, in other words, the Holy Spirit was standing above him, standing before him. So he did not have the ability, the strength, spiritually or physically, to stand in the presence of the divine. And this is also stated regarding Bilam, right? Bilam, Nofel, this is what's said in the text, Nofel v'guloi einayim, falling, and revealed to his eyes. And that basically, in other words, Bilam certainly was not circumcised, and yet he experienced the divine presence. That's Galui Einayim, but he was also Nofel. He could not stand in that presence. And there's a parenthesis here. It's interesting whether or not this is Rashi's own little notes or whether this is the note of the editor, although quite honestly, why the editor would have added something in here doesn't make sense. On the other hand, I mean, possibly that he was, because you know that in those parentheses we have a lot of references to Talmud, etc. But it's interesting, this is a sort of personal reference. It says, Bebaraita de Rabbi Eliezer Matzachi Chen. I found this, right, in this Baraita, this early text of Rabbi Eliezer. There is, in fact, an extant midrash called Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, the chapters of Rabbi Eliezer. It's a significant, very significant midrash, and I've only looked at little pieces of it, seen very little. It's actually translated into English as well. It's been translated, but I think William Browdy translated it. At any rate, that's apparently there's this reference here to this point. So at this point, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I understand. So clearly, where does the circumcision take place? It takes place on the male organ of reproduction. And we also know that one's sexual drive is sort of focused on that. And the fact that one circumcises it, I believe, is a lesson regarding control of one's sexual appetite. That it's there as symbolic to say that we do not allow our sexual appetite to control our behavior. This goes all the way back to that chapter in Genesis. I'm not sure if it's chapter 3, where we're talking about the snake in the Garden of Eden. And of course, the snake, as you know, is a phallic symbol, and how the snake convinces Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And in fact, understanding, and I thank my teacher, Professor Dr. Hanan Brichtel, for this lesson, that expression of good and evil here has to do with the sexual drive. That's essentially what it has to do. That they lost their immortality, that up to that point, human beings were immortal. Understanding this all from a literary point of view, and in a sense, cutting the foreskin is, in a sense, symbolic of cutting the snake. That is to say, the idea of controlling one's sexual drive and one's sexual appetite, and at the same time, gaining immortality. So there's a very strong connection to immortality in that act of circumcision and this particular covenant. So that's what I think is going on here, even though the Torah doesn't say it explicitly. But I think if you connect the dots, you'll see that there is this connection, this very strong connection. It's not a small thing. Going back into the text, Ani, hine, as for me, briti itach, my covenant is with you, God continuing to speak to Abram. V'hayita la'av hamon goyim. This is interesting, right? You shall be the father of a multitude of nations. And I believe this is an extremely universalistic element of the Torah, that basically God is saying to Abraham that the peoples of the earth, that humanity will have its connection to you. And in that sense, since if you follow what I've been saying, God is saying to Abram at this point, right? Because he's going to make him this father of a multitude of nations, that all humanity now has an opportunity to participate in this covenant, in this relationship, right? We also know that there's a level of connection, right? Because we read that little piece about falling on his face and its reference to being circumcised, that when one is circumcised, it purifies a person to a point where they can have a closer connection to the divine. And what this is suggesting then is that as descendants of Abraham, one has this connection, all humanity. Going on. V'lo yikare od et shimcha Avram. Your name shall no longer be called Abram, v'haya shimcha Avraham, but your name shall be Abraham. So this is where Abram's name changes to Abraham. Finishing up the sentence. Ki av hamon goyim netaticha. For as the father of a multitude of nations, I have set you. I've set you. I've placed you. So Avraham, we'll take a look at the Rashi here. Let's see if we can find the Rashi right. Ki av hamon goyim, for a father of the multitude of nations, right? Lashon notarikon, right? This is like a stenographic note, meaning like stenographers, in order to write down spoken speech quick enough, they have abbreviations. They abbreviate certain words, and they know what that means. And that's what this is saying. This is what a notarikon is. It's obviously a Greek word, and you can hear the word notary in this word, right? So notarikon shel shmo. This is, in a sense, an abbreviation of his name. So Avraham is a stenographic note for Av Hamon Goyim, right? Av Hamon Goyim. Now notice there's no, in the word, his name originally was Avram, right? So let's go back just to show you the word, right? Right. So his name is Avram, but his name is becoming Avraham, right? And yet Avraham is a stenographer's note for Av Hamon Goyim. And there's no resh, there's no R sound in the word Av Hamon Goyim. So the question becomes, why is this resh still? Why is it Avraham and not Avaham without the resh? Why? So let's take a look at the Rashi on this. Let's find it. Lashon notari shel shmo, v'reish, and the reish shaita bo batchila, and this reish that was in the name of Ram, shelo haya av ela la'aram. There the reish is necessary, and there it means father to Aram. Avram is an abbreviation of Av Aram, right? That he, at that point, he was only father to Aram, Shehu Mekomo, because that's where he, I believe this is referring to Abraham himself. He's saying this was his location, right? This is where he came from. V'achshav av l'chol ha'olam. Rashi states it explicitly, but now he is the father, the patriarch, right, of the entire world, l'chol ha'olam, for all humanity. V'alfilu reish shahaita bo mitchila, and so as a result, the reish that was in it to begin with, because originally he was father of Aram, and you need that reish for Aram. Lo zaza mimkoma. It never moved from its place. In other words, it still remained significant. It wasn't that he was no longer father of Aram. It was not, it was like it was saying he's father not only of Aram, but of humanity. And that's why the Reish is still there. I think that is the point that Rashi's trying to make. Going on, this is interesting. She'af Yud Shel Sarai, because it turns out, as we're going to see, that remember it's Avram and Sarai. That's what Sarah is referred to at this time, right? But that Sarai becomes changed at the same time to Sarah, right? There's a hey attached to Sarah's name, and the yud disappeared. And so there is this amazing midrash, right? That the yud on the name Sarai, nit ra'ama, it complained al hashchina, to the divine presence. In other words, this yud of Sarah's name, we're speaking, of course, in a very poetic kind of sense, as if the yud, the letter yud, complained to God, right? Ad shehosifa lihushua, until God decided to add that yud to the name Hosea for Joshua, Yehoshua, Shneemar, because again we see in Numbers 12, Vayikra Moshe leHosea bin Nun Yehoshua, and Moses called Hosea bin Nun Yehoshua. He changed his name. And this is in that chapter in Numbers chapter 12, that talks about the incident of the 12 spies, and where Joshua and Caleb are the only two of the 12 spies who have the faith to take the Jewish people into the land of Israel. And I think that is also part of the significance of why Joshua's name was changed to Yehoshua, right? It means God will save us. It has that kind of meaning, right? God will save us. And that Joshua, of course, had that faith. He was demonstrating in chapter 12 his utter faith in God, that God would assist the Jewish people in conquering those 10 Canaanite, or seven, excuse me, seven Canaanite nations. And that's, in a sense, part of the underscoring of his name being changed. But the idea of the Yud being moved to a different place, but still not disappearing. And so this is actually, I think, a really interesting midrash regarding this going on. Vehifreti otcha b'ma'od ma'od, and I shall make you extremely fruitful. Unetaticha lagoyim, and I will give you to the nations. So I think by that's an interesting expression, right? I will give you to the nations, meaning I believe that the nations can attribute their descendancy to Abraham as well, that they have a connection to Abram. Let's take a look. Rashi has something to say. Unetaticha lagoyim, I will give you to the nations. Let's see what he says. Yisrael ve'edom, okay? So he says Yisrael is, of course, Jacob. Ve'edom is Esau, right? And he's saying, I'm going to, by nations, he's including all of them. Shahare Yishmael Kfar Hayalo. He doesn't have to mention Yishmael, because as we read earlier on, he already had Yishmael Kfar Hayalo. V'hala v'lo haya mivavsro alav. Here it says, and he did not give a prophecy, right? He didn't give him an announcement regarding him, because he was already there. He already was a descendant of Abram in life. He was there in the world. However, of course, Jacob and Esau had not come around yet. This is also so interesting in terms of how the rabbis interpreted this, because Edom also was identified subsequently as Rome. And we know that Rome was one of the nations, it was the nation that destroyed the Jewish people. In the year 70, they destroyed the temple, and essentially the fate of the Jewish people was sealed for practically 2 millennia. From that point until the reestablishment of the State of Israel in 1948, they were in exile for that long. And Rome was the nation that essentially, or the civilization that did this. And yet we also say they are included in some sense in this covenant as well. So I should mention also, though, that since under Constantine, Rome became Christian, and that also Christianity is understood, and the world's Christian population is understood as being a connection to the Jewish people through Esau, What's interesting, though, is Esau is a twin of Jacob. And of course, the Muslim nations, although Islam was not in existence for so long, not certainly about these, what we're reading here is represents Ishmael. And they are very open and state quite specifically that they are descendants of Ishmael. Let's take a look here. Right, it's really amazing. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful stuff. So let me find the place here. Yes, Goyim, I will give you to the nations. Here we did not end the sentence. Umelachim mimcha yetzeu, and kings will come out from you. In other words, there will be kings of these nations who ultimately can claim a connection to Abraham. Going on. We're not finished. This is all significant regarding this agreement, this covenant that God makes with Abraham. So I'm really glad we're taking a careful look at it here. V'hakimoti et briti, I shall establish my covenant, beini uveinecha, between myself and you, uvein zaracha, and between your offspring, acharecha, after you. In other words, all your descendants, ladorotam. No question, it's not immediate descendants, it's in perpetuity, ladorotam, according to their generations, levrit olam, as an everlasting covenant. In reading this chapter, we get to see how the covenant of circumcision is just so, so, so important. Liot lacha Elohim, to serve as your God, ulazaracha acharecha, and to your seed following you. So this sentence, of course, just really emphasizes the idea of the perpetuity of this particular covenant. Here we go with the Rashi. V'hakimoti et briti, I will establish my covenant. Umahu, so what specifically is the covenant about? Habrit liot l'cha Elohim. The covenant is that I shall be your Elohim. So Elohim, right? What's the difference between Adonai and Elohim? I'm going to mention this, I'm sure, a number of times because it's so fundamental. So the idea of Adonai has to do with the God being the transcendent creator, that God is the author of the universe, and that, whatever goes on in the universe, ultimately we can attribute to a divine cause, to the divine cause. The fact that we think is the fact that God has created the universe in such a way that we can think. The fact that plants grow is the fact that the divine creator created plants to grow in this particular way. And all the things that science discovers and uncovers and explores to the vastness of the stars and the galaxies, etc., all of those are there. As a matter of fact, if anything, we should be in awe of a creator that made these things possible. That's this idea of a transcendency, of a divine ultimate cause beyond and outside, in a sense, of all of creation. But all of creation is a result of the divine cause. I love a metaphor that, in a sense, talks about God thinking. In other words, when it says God said, let there be light, instead of translating Vayomer as he said, just translate it as he thought. That, in a sense, we are in God's mind, if we can speak in that kind of term. However, we didn't talk about Elohim. Elohim is the willingness on the part of human beings to accept divine authority. Just because you believe in a divine creator, just because you believe in a transcendent God creator, doesn't necessarily mean that you have a personal relationship in terms of being commanded, of serving that creator. And that is that is the meaning of Elohim. When we say in the Shema, Adonai Eloheinu, we are saying that we accept the notion of commandedness. that as human beings, we recognize our relationship to something so amazing, so ineffable, etc., and that we nevertheless, as human beings, have a purpose in responding to that divine creator. And this is what this is saying, that of course, even the very act of circumcision, given people's natural inclinations, etc., especially when it comes to sexual mores, saying you're willing to actually subjugate that to an extent is an act of accepting divine authority. It's a pretty fundamental way of expressing that. So we'll stop here, but we'll hopefully continue with this, exploring this as we move through this chapter. So I just want to make sure we have here, and we'll set the post. And I'm going to stop the share. So, Harlan, do you have any thoughts regarding this
Uh,
at this point?
they still have circumcision for
Yes.
babies.
Yes, of course. We
Uh,
do. It's it forever. Yeah, Jewish babies, Jewish male babies are supposed to be circumcised and brought
oh,
into the covenant.
okay. That's 8 days after they're born.
It's going to say it. We're going to see. We haven't actually gotten into, we
Yeah.
haven't talked yet about the actual circumcision.
Okay. Uh, it
Excuse
seems to
me,
me
but
that
we will. I'm sorry.
it seems to me that circumcision is very healthy.
That may well be if you accept what the Torah is, I believe the Torah is trying to teach us here. It is healthy in an incredible kind of way
Yeah.
because in a way it's guaranteeing immortality.
Oh.
So
And Isaac and his brother weren't circumcised later on.
they were, yes, yes.
That seems to be awful awful hurting when they're older.
True. And Abram himself, of course, was 99 years old when he
Ooh,
circumcised himself. Yes, I know. I
wow.
know. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to stop the recording here, and with God's help, I will see you tomorrow.